Hey everybody, welcome to another get together of Two Bald Nerds. I'm Mike Myers, and that guy's Richard Chapman. Today, we want to be talking about the concept of defense in depth. Now, Richard, I don't know if you know this of me, but I'm a huge military history fanatic, particularly World War II and Cold War.
Mm.
And we always talk about certain amazing battles that took place in World War II that took place on the Eastern Front. And one in particular is the Battle of Kursk, Kursk, which is certainly the largest tank battle that has ever taken place in the history of mankind. It is massive. And the Germans are attacking the Russians, and the Russians managed to stop the Germans primarily by having a defense that was in lots of layers so that the Germans could crash through one or two layers of Russian defense, but then it would hold up. And it worked. And so when I think of the term defense in depth, I literally go back to that famous Battle of Kursk, um, which any good Russian could tell you about off the top of their head because they all learned it in high school.
Well, I'm definitely not a good Russian, so I actually wasn't familiar with that battle. But sounds like that 100% uh, displays exactly what defense and layers is. My thought process goes back even older than that, like old castles. I've been to castles in Europe where you've got, an initial wall, and then you've got kind of a grounds area where maybe there's even a moat, and then you've got another wall with a separate gate. So you've kind of got, again, those layers of defense. You got to get through that first wall to be able to get into, attack the second wall before you actually get into the main area of the castle. So that logic has been around, I think, for a long time, but I do believe it does have military-ish or ish background. So yeah, I can see that.
Well, sure. And I guess I remember first hearing about defense in depth in the world of IT probably around the year 2000 ish, late 90s, when we first started to hear anything of that terminology. And you got the problem with defense in depth as a concept is it tends to make people think about shells, right?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in a lot of ways, when we're talking about IT defense in depth, the 3D physical world imagery falls apart a little bit because so many things that we think are in depth are really just patches of the many holes that we might have. Uh,
Yeah.
Putting in a edge router in and of itself is not defense in depth. It's defense at one particular depth, but it's not everywhere. So I think there can often be confusion with that a little bit, but it works, and it's obviously very, very important. But earlier you were teasing me. You're like, well, the NSA took over all this stuff, and I know what you're talking about. There's been a lot of United States government documentation where, and if you read the fine print, even they will admit they didn't invent this stuff, but uh,
They like to take credit for
well, their version of it.
it.
They
Yeah.
may not have invented defense in depth, but they made it better. So
Right.
you see that in a lot of different places. Uh, d- d- I'm trying to quickly come up with one. Now I'm about to put my foot in my mouth here, where the government will, especially in terms of frameworks and standards and all that type of stuff, is not afraid to steal terminology that's bantered out there in the world of IT and make it sound like they came up with it. Uh,
Yeah.
in a way, they do though come up with these things because they're the usually the first ones to say it like that. And if you got a big enough printing press, you can do some pretty impressive things in terms of defining terminology and things like that. And heck, in any industry, but IT, we like to change our terminology every 8 months anyway. So
True, true. I mean, translating the idea of layered defense from, military processes and military protectionary defenses is not, it's not out of the realm of, what you would think of logically. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And I will say that 3D kind of model that you see almost looks like a bullseye where your most important things are in the center and you've got a layer around that and a circle around that. That does get used to illustrate layers and layers of defense when it comes to networks and so forth as well too. But it's not really that simplistic. It's much more abstract, right? When we talk about layers of defense, yes, you have a perimeter. Yes, you have that exterior wall, like you mentioned with the router or firewall, IDS, IPS systems in place. I mean, that's kind of like your initial barrier around your network. But there's other things inside that can completely bypass that by the users on the inside, right? So it's the same, but it's different, right?
It is the same, but it is different. That's it's just, it can be a challenge because when you see that bullseye pattern, you see like one thing, one layer of protection is completely inside another layer of protection.
Right.
And a lot of times that's not really true so much as
Yeah.
one covers this part, one covers that part. So, I guess I
Yep.
could make the analogy more painful by, instead of individually colored rings, make them multicolored rings, or I don't know.
No, but I mean that's 100% accurate because, for instance, like one of the common ways to protect, and we've talked about EDR in the past. You can 100% completely bypass the firewall and that line of defense by a well-crafted phishing email. It's not necessarily that the firewall failed because the firewall didn't have anything to do with it. That user received an email and clicked on a link or downloaded a malicious file, and that gave the threat actor access. We still look at that as layered defense, but you're right. It's not a protectionary level behind the firewall. It's in addition to, right?
That's
It
right.
provides an additional coverage there. You can't just put up a firewall and go, oh, our network is safe. No, it's not. Because even that firewall will let signature-based attacks go through to a vulnerability in a software application in your network. So that's where OS and app security comes into play, vulnerability management. That's another layer of defense. And it's not that that it has to be behind the firewall. Obviously it is, but it can be 100% necessary to protect that outside of the firewall. I mean, they're just in addition to each other. So yeah. Not to mention data security as well too, data and information protection, and actually protecting your data. Making sure it's encrypted, it's stored in a proper location. Backing up your data, and then also securing that as well too, right? So there's a lot to it. It's not just as simple as put up a couple of walls and a couple of gates, right?
Yeah, well, and that's where you see stuff like NIST frameworks to.
Cool.
I'm not saying they're perfect. They're not. In fact, NIST will tell you they're not perfect, but they're a good start for so
It's a good
many
template. Yeah,
organizations that are
yeah.
like, okay, what does this defense in depth even mean? Are we going to have to cover our rear ends for some kind of, you know, legislation coming through or whatever it might be? Going to NIST documentation is a great place to, at least, I'm not going to say it's going to cut the fog, but at least going to make the fog manageable in terms of understanding whatever one great new thing it might be. That this certainly goes way beyond just concepts like defense in depth. I mean, you would see that for
Yeah, for
almost
sure.
any. If you want to get a zeitgeist of how people are bantering a word about, look up what NIST says about it. It's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, yeah, and with different network layouts, attack surface management is not always consistent. They're much more dynamic now than they used to be. Used to be just all on-prem, right? So you could put up, kind of a good protectionary, barrier there. But now you've got so much cloud integration. You've got data storage in data centers, all over the world. So it does get a little bit more complex. So yeah, those frameworks can absolutely help with trying to make sure you're taking all the steps necessary to think about all of the possible holes in your defenses so those attackers cannot get in.
like it. And so I was actually curious, Richard, are there any certifications that go along with defense in depth? I mean, it's a big enough concept. I'm almost thinking maybe there'd be a certification. I can't think of one.
Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head either that's specific to defense in depth.
Well, I mean, I know
Um,
Network Plus, Security Plus,
mhm.
CCNA, ICND1, whatever they call it this week. Certainly, I'll mention it. It would
Yeah,
be,
I think some of your higher level management certifications in the cybersecurity world, I do believe also are going to give you some additional focus on that as well too. Certified Network Defender is one that I just popped up here real quick. CND. I'm not very familiar with that one.
neither am I.
Um, let's see. That's more industrial control systems there. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it might be a combination of all of them. That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that.
No worries.
Hmm.
Anyway, so listen, Richard, this is an interesting one. Maybe we could do a follow-up video sometime on defense in depth and actually talk about what are those main pieces and stuff like that. I think we did a good kind of an overview, but
Hmm.
maybe we could do another one where actually zeroing in on, you know, these 8 pieces. What do you
Yeah,
think?
absolutely. Yep, that's pretty easy to do, so we can definitely do that.
All right. Well, folks, we are out of here, and I guess we will catch you guys next time. Until then, this is Mike Meyer, Richard Chapman, Two Bald Nerds saying, see ya. If you like Two Bald Nerds, check out our entire playlist right here. It's a lot of fun. We'll see you there.